This short video is about a model, actually two models, of the Arena Chapel constructed on the Rutgers University OpenSim campus. My interests are the learning teaching potential of the virtual worlds, especially relating to art history. Having studied buildings in Second Life, I set out to see what I might learn about the architecture of the Arena Chapel, a building I had not studied since my undergraduate days, when I last read James Doublebine's compilation of essays on the chapel. Ahead is a footprint of Enrico Scrovegni's palace from reconstructed from the 18th century maps of the area. It's just a simple box on the plan with a facade put together from an 18th century print of the facade. The chapel played an important role in the changing functions of the chapel in its first decade, and so I included it here. Flying around to the north side of the chapel, we see the outside entrance to the crypt, the meeting place for a confraternity allied with Scrovegni to begin the chapel. Past the chapel entrance, on the north wall, is an archway in the brickwork for a door. This door has since been opened up to connect to a visitor center, but I do not have pictures. High above is another arch for a formerly for a window, and to the left a door, now the only entrance to an otherwise forgotten upper room. I've made a connection between the palace and the rough connection between the palace and the chapel. High above on the east wall we see the grand windows to the crypt, up to the upper room. And flying around the south side, we see another door. And it's time to enter the chapel. Here we see Giotto's frescoes, which are the reason this building has survived in its present form. After all the changes of function in the first few years, it is the nave, designed to show off the frescoes, that survives relatively unchanged. The building is surprisingly large, and the frescoes high on the walls can be seen from all the angles below. Of course, we can allow our cameras to soar up and see them from a better angle. The two altars in the middle of the nave corresponding to chapels, one to St. Catherine of Alexander and one to St. John Evangelist. I've never been satisfied with illustrations of buildings, especially when one can see into another space but not get there. The choir of the Arena Chapel is one of those. Here we can walk in and see the frescoes by mostly unknown masters of the later life and death of the Virgin. We also see Giovanni Pisano's Madonna and the Tomb of Scrovegni in the apse, and we can walk into the sacristy. Oh, before we walk into the sacristy, high above in the choir is a window, which was for the mother and wife of Scrovegni to view the proceedings in the chapel. Before the nave was finished, before the choir was finished, there was another window in the nave, which is the archway on the exterior that we saw. Now we can go into the sacristy, which is reconstructed after, thanks to the two-volume work by Giuseppe Basili, the wonderful two-volume work. Here we see a statue of Scrovani, which I assume is the sculpture that was originally on the outside of the north wall next to the entrances to the nave and to the crypt. And we can TP up to the upper room. If I can find it here, and I'm all of a sudden having trouble here. And we can sit Mr. Brubovna down while we look at the room. This is the door to the exterior that we saw outside, and is decorated with secular Renaissance paintings. Here are the three windows on the east wall, and here is the viewing area to the proceedings in the chapel. Look up into the barrel vault here. It gives a hint of what the decoration might have been like in the palace. And now we can TP back to the nave. When I completed this model, I wanted to explore the medium a bit more. A model of the building as it looks now is nice, but it's just that. What about a reconstruction of how it might have looked in an earlier era? With that, we'll take a walk through the palace here. We have a little walkway. Maybe we'll fly and go a little faster. And I call this palace the Arena Chapel circa 1303, although the year is a little bit up in question, I would think. And as we enter the chapel, fortunately for me, art historian who knows, fortunately for me who has not really studied the Arena Chapel, art historian Laura Jacobus has already written a book on the architecture, and so I built a model based on the drawings in her book with some whimsical deviations. After all, a reconstruction should be mostly a mental exercise that in this case sheds light on the changing functions of the building during those first few years. Churches during this period were generally painted from east to west, and the sequence also went from top to bottom. In this model, I included the top of the east wall and the top register of the north and south walls, which is the Marian cycle. Presumably, Giotto did an undersketch for the frescoes as planned for the composition. We have no idea what they look like. It is known that he made changes, especially on the eastern wall, so my sketches just hinted a process, and I chickened out a little bit on the lower east wall because of some issues with those panels. On the very top of the east wall, on the lunette, Giotto painted a scene of God the Father dispatching Gabriel to tell Mary about her upcoming role. Jacobus has made a convincing case that God was once on a stained glass window. In the present chapel, God is painted on a wooden panel because the east end was built up over the window. There is no idea what the apse looked like in this earlier chapel, the more modest apse, and so we have some room to play, and I've mostly used Jacobus's drawings, but did a few deviations. There was originally a choir screen in the middle of the nave, allowing the confraternity to sit in sort of a proto-choir. Jacobus has noticed that some of the panels of the present ambos were reused and surmised that they were part of a screen. I built the choir screen from her drawings. There are some issues, and actually when I sat down to actually build this, fitting it all together, which may have been my mistakes, and somewhat due to scale. This is done one-to-one, but I'm told that I should have built this 1/3 larger, and possibly some of these building problems I had might have gone away if that had happened. Before we go further, here we have the south door, which I reconstructed from the present north door. Slap that on there. Jacobus's reconstruction assumed that there was no sacristy and that the priest dressed in a room in the palace. Like Jacobus, we gave him a sheltered passageway to the courtyard. The confraternity could gather here, go down to the crypt for their meetings, or go up to the chapel for the liturgy. The women have a walkway from the palace to a stairway to the previous upper room, in which to view the proceedings from the nave window. And this view would have been from what was the palace at the time. The landscape of my model has signs, information about the chapel, and up here about the Annunciation processions and festivals that would have been held in the arena, both before and after the chapel. My name is Donald Beetham. Mary Denver did the landscaping under the tutelage of Gwenette Ryder. Gwenette also was very helpful during the building process. Rick Anderson, the director of Virtual Worlds at Rutgers University, provided the sim for department use and much support for this project.